I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the problems before us in terms of transportation, and then I'll go back to these amendments based on whatever the chairman would like and however she'd like to handle the debate on these amendments. You know, the thing I think about is that right now our transportation trust fund is not growing at the rate of which our needs are growing. And I don't think anybody, neither the chairman of the Appropriation Committee or the committee that is responsible for our transportation authorization program, would disagree with that. I don't think anybody else would disagree that in a year when we're going to have a true, not an in-round accounting, but a true budget deficit of $1.8 trillion by the time you count the money that we're going to steal from Social Security and other trust funds, that we're going to have $1.8 trillion that we're going to borrow from our grandchildren, and at a time when we have, at a minimum, 130,000 bridges in disrepair in this country, and that's the Department of Transportation's own numbers. Out of 600 plus some thousand, 130,000 either have to have lesser loads or a fewer number of vehicles going across them, or do not meet the designs needed for the loads that they're carrying, or are crumbling and aren't expected to collapse but are falling apart, that at this time that we ought to be spending our money on anything except roads and bridges. You know, the debate Senator McCain put out here, it's just one way of getting at the problem. Inside the transportation bill is a requirement that if a state gets money and they want to fix a bridge, 10% of the money to fix that bridge has to go to make things look nice around it. Well, that's great if we're running a great surplus or we're not borrowing the money from our kids. But right now, the fact that we mandate obligated monies to state highway and transportation departments, that they have to spend 10% of the money that's obligated on aesthetics, makes no common sense. It does if we have an excess of funds. It does. It is something that we would all agree to. But when we have the problems, well, we have 13,000 people a year dying because of the quality of the roads in this country, not quality of vehicles, not driver error, but the quality of roads, and we have this large number of bridges that are truly, in the long run, not safe. Why would we be spending money on anything other than roads and bridges in a transportation project as far as surface transportation? And I'm not talking about trains and intercity bus. I know we have to do that as well. But for the proportion that goes, why would we not spend that money on the real needs that are out there? 13,000 lives is a lot of lives. Actually, it's one of those benchmarks you can measure Congress on. We'd rather have $5 billion worth of earmarks that make us look good at home than make sure that $5 billion goes towards saving somebody's life by repairing a road that needs to be fixed right now. Right now, not next year, not 2 years from now, right now. Why are we going to have these things that make us look good and may be a need, but may not necessarily be a priority? How many of them are a priority over the falling down bridges in this country? The families who lose members because of road quality in this country don't think those are priorities. They think fixing the roads and the bridges are priorities. But you see, we have a disease in the U.S. Senate and in the U.S. Congress, is we think we know better. And we don't want to make the tough priorities that might not sell well in a particular area in our home state, that would in fact solve some of the major problems with transportation in this country, because we won't look as good. And yet we can spend money on taxiways for airports that have 6 flights a day and have very few people through it. and subsidize every passenger to the tune of $130 when they could drive an hour and find an airport that we wouldn't have to spend any of that money on. Most of us drive an hour to get to airports, but yet we do earmarks. We decide. The wisdom of us. You know, it's pretty interesting. I heard the ranking member talk about oversight. There isn't any significant oversight going on in this Congress. I almost laughed out loud. You know, for every hearing that we have, we ought to have 10 oversight hearings. We talk about we're going to say where the money goes, and then we don't go follow where the money goes. We don't do our job of oversight. And the next gen, I understand that's an important priority. I'm not questioning that. But the point of Senator McCain's amendment isn't next gen. It's earmarks. It's the fact that at least here's something that we know is going to buy safety in aviation, whereas the rest of the earmarks aren't. I mean, we got an earmarked museum in the bill. Tell me in a time when we have 9.7% unemployment, we have a trust fund for transportation that's belly up, that we're stealing the money from our kids every 6 months to keep it viable rather than from the taxes from consumption of gasoline and diesel. Tell me that that's a priority right now when we are running a $1.8 trillion deficit. The fact is we refuse to make hard choices in Washington. We make choices for our political careers. We make choices for the well-endowed. We make choices for the well-connected, for the well-heeled. Whether it's beach nourishment and the hundreds of millions of dollars that are made off that, or it's a museum or a bike path, or the restoration of a train station. Tell me where those are in terms of priorities of the 9.7% of Americans that don't have a job and are looking for one, and the other 6% that are so discouraged they're not even looking anymore. Tell me why that's a priority. Senator McCain's point is dead on. You know, there's a common sense test. Would the average guy with the same amount of money fix the bridges and fix the highways? Or would they do the superfluous stuff, the enhancement stuff, the feel-good stuff, if it were about his kids and his family? The average guy wouldn't. But you see, we're not the average guy. We don't have to play by the rules, because we know that the court of public opinion only comes after us once every 6 years. And that if we can, in fact, enhance our ability to raise our campaign funds, if we can, in fact, look good to the well-connected, then we're going to be able to fund a way to say a message that's something different than what we actually did. Now, that's pretty cynical. But when we do have 13,000 people dying on roads every year because of the quality of the roads, and those aren't my numbers, those are NHTSA's numbers, wouldn't you think that every dollar we have ought to fix the roads and fix the bridges and wait on the aesthetics till later? Wouldn't you think the common man with common sense would say, let's do the most important thing first that buys us the most safety and the best transportation effect, rather than make the politicians and their well-heeled buddies look good? I understand why people are upset with the U.S. Congress. It's because we make decisions that don't have much connection with reality. And then after we do it, and we don't do the oversight that's required, then we blame it on an administration. You know, I thought the debate about whether or not we could trust the FAA, we can trust the FAA if we do the following things. Make sure they're before us every 2 or 3 weeks talking about the progress of what they're doing. Making sure we're having the oversight hearings. Making sure we're doing our job to make sure that the bureaucracy with which we give the responsibility to carry out policy is in fact being held accountable. And if they're not, withdrawing the funds through a special rescission package to make sure since you're not acting responsible, we're going to withdraw your money. The last time there was a rescission, a true rescission in the U.S. Congress was 1995. So we talk a big game about what a good job we do oversight and what good judgment. What really happens is staff members make those decisions, what gets included and what doesn't get earmarked. Sometimes it's based on economic priorities. Sometimes it's based on the economic priority of who's running for re-election. The other problem that we have is things aren't very transparent here, in spite of our President's desire that they be that way. And I have a couple of amendments that are going to be to make sure that the public reports that are required in this bill are made available to the American people, not just to the committee staff, to make sure that HUD reports to Congress on the homes they own and the cost of the taxpayers, not just to a committee of Congress. I now call up Amendment 2371 and ask that it be the pending amendment.
Without objection.
And I want to talk about what this amendment does. This amendment forbids the mandatory spending of that 10% of money on things that really aren't going to make a difference when it comes to highway safety and bridge repair. And it says that Gary Ridley, the Department of Transportation in Oklahoma, can take all of the money and make new bridges and new roads and repair bridges and doesn't have to worry about taking 10% of the money and spending it on aesthetics. At another time, another place, maybe we'd want to do that. But with our infrastructure crumbling and with the trust fund not with enough money because of the economic shape we find ourselves in, to continue to mandate that every transportation department in the country has to spend a full 10% of their money, not on what is important, but on something somebody may like, not on something that's about safety, but on what somebody may like and what may look good, to me doesn't connect with common sense. I'm probably a minority in that opinion in this building, but I'm not a minority in that opinion in this country. When times are good, you can afford to make such discretionary spending mandates on the states. When times are tough, when infrastructure is in poor shape, when the quality of our roads is taking people's lives every day, and where bridges are falling down or chunks are falling off of them and injuring people severely, as happened in Tulsa 6 weeks ago on an interstate bridge, falls through the windshield of a car and critically injures an individual who's just driving down the interstate, it is time for us to use common sense on how we spend this money. I also would make one other point, is that this bill, compared to last year, in terms of real numbers, not in terms of the numbers that have been spun out there, is a 22% increase. And if you go through all the appropriation bills we're bringing to the floor and what we've already passed, it's like there's no recession going on. There's absolutely no inflation, and yet we're growing government at 12 times the rate of inflation. And we're doing it on bill after bill after bill. There's no apology anywhere from the Appropriations Committee that we're sorry we have to spend this increased amount of money, in spite of the fact that we absolutely don't have it, and that we can't winnow down and make our priorities sharper and better. No, what we do is we just bump the number. Just in case you're interested, If you include contract authority, there's $75.8 billion. And even if you don't include contract authority, you have a 12% increase. In the HUD portion of the bill, we have a 10% increase. So it's not just transportation. We're increasing housing and urban development 10%. So there's no inflation, tax revenues are down, there's no question we have greater needs, but there's no force to say how do we more efficiently put out the money, how do we hold those that are spending the money more accountable, how do we get greater value for the money that we are spending. You know what we do? We just take the credit card out of our pocket and we put it in an ATM and it says charge to your grandchildren, charge to your children. That's what we do. And then we come up here and we say, this is absolutely necessary. You know, the vast majority of families in this country today are making tough decisions, very tough decisions. They're saying, either I have a job, I'm lucky to have a job, and boy am I thankful, and I don't want to end up without a job. I think I'll start prioritizing where I have to spend money. The people where one of the two workers in the family have lost a job, they're making those tough decisions every day. What is an absolute necessity and what isn't? They're the average American, and actually it's more than the average American. Almost every American's making those kind of decisions today. But isn't it curious that the Congress isn't? Isn't it curious that we don't prioritize? Isn't it curious that it's been years under Republican control and Democrat control since we've had an appropriation bill that comes out that spends less money? Are all these agencies efficient? Could it be done in a better way to get better value with less money? Could we force savings in these branches of government? Those questions aren't even being asked. There's no priority questions asked. What we do is we say, here's our 302B number. Now, how are we going to spend the money? Rather than saying, what's the need? How efficient is the bureaucracy that's utilizing that need under the policy prescriptions that we give them? And what are we going to do about it? So we come out spending hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars with billions of earmarks. You know, I heard mention about the earmarks. What the American people need to know about earmarks is this. It's not the earmark that's bad. It's the extortion that comes with the earmark. Because everybody here knows that if you have an earmark in an appropriation bill and you don't vote for the appropriation bill, the next time you want an earmark, guess what happens? They happen to remind you that, oh, well, you had an earmark in the last one, but you didn't vote for the bill. So, you know, since you're not supporting our bill, we're probably not going to be as likely to include your earmark. Now, what does that do? What that does is that takes the problem with earmarks is it takes the focus off what we're doing collectively for the best of the country and makes the focus about the individual and the state. There's nothing in this document, which is the U.S. Constitution, that gives us the right to think about our states. When you're sworn in here, they don't say, Tom Coburn, Oklahoma, you'll uphold the Constitution as long as it protects Oklahoma. It says you'll uphold the Constitution. For our founders knew that any state couldn't be healthy unless we as a nation were healthy. And yet earmarks undermine that every time and force us back to parochialism. Not a federalism, a parochialism. So we take the money from individuals in the various states, and then through our wisdom of all knowledge in Washington, we send it back so we look good, rather than leaving the money there in the first place and letting you decide how best to spend your own money. So we don't lessen spending, we always increase it. We claim oversight, which we never do to the level that is required with a government as big as this. And then we complain if somebody wants to eliminate earmarks. Not because the individual earmark may not be a good thing. I can't think of many earmarks that probably aren't good things. But because the earmarks aren't necessarily a priority for the nation as a whole. And that's the difference in being and enhancing statesmanship versus politics. It is okay for Oklahoma to lose for a period of time if our country gets better. I've explained that to my state. I refuse to do earmarks for my state. The reason is we're in a big pot of trouble right now as a nation. A large pot of trouble. If you watch the dollar index in the markets, what you're seeing happen in the last 2 weeks is the value of your savings are going down because the value of the dollar is declining rapidly. Because everybody knows that the money that we're borrowing today will only be able to be paid back through highly inflated dollars. So what you've worked for your entire life, what you dream for your kids, we are undermining here in a little bit in this very bill. It's just a little bit. But you know, a whole bunch of little bits become a lot. And so here we go. We don't make the priorities. We don't make the hard choices. We increase the spending, a ridiculous amount for the time we find ourselves in, knowing that a good portion of the spending is going to be borrowed from our kids as we watch the dollar flounder, knowing that the value that you put aside for your children in the future isn't going to be worth anything. It's a pretty sick, neurotic system that we're operating under because it doesn't have enough sunshine on it. And that was the purpose for Senator McCain's amendment. That's the purpose for this amendment. Is let's have some transparency. Let's have some common sense. Let's not force state transportation departments who need critical dollars for bridge repair and road repair to spend it on a bicycle path that nobody's going to ride. Or a sound barrier that truly doesn't cut the sound. Let's spend it on roads and bridges. Let's not force them to make choices that are stupid. Let's trust people to do what's right. You know, the other observation I made, and then I'll close. When I was born in 1948, and I've seen a shift in our country in that 60 plus years. Our nature and our history used to be that we trusted American citizens. I'm talking the federal government. That we assumed you would do the right thing. You know, unfortunate today, so much of the assumption of the federal government, especially as it relates to the states, is on the basis that we know you're going to do the wrong thing and we're here to catch you. And we know better, and we're going to tell you how to do it, when to do it, and where to do it. And that came as we had Supreme Court rulings that took away the constraints that our founders said was necessary. It's called the enumerated powers of the Constitution. It's Article 1, Section 8, if you want to look it up. And if you read what Madison and Jefferson had to say about that, we have been totally violating the intent for the last 30 years in this country of what they said, what they meant, and what they knew we would say about what they meant. And so we find ourselves in a position where we dominate with the power of dollars and taxation to the detriment of our freedom, to the detriment of common sense, and the detriment of goodwill. I'm not sure how the chairman and ranking member will respond to this amendment, but for this time, at this time, where we find ourselves and the situation we find ourselves, we ought to eliminate this mandatory 10% and let Oklahoma and Kansas and Texas and Kentucky and New York build bridges and highways, not build aesthetics with the money that's their money, which we took from them, sending it back, and now we're sending it with all these strings on it. With that, I'd yield the floor.